Hello, my name is Leah Mushid. I'm a reporter here at the Western Standard, and today I have with me Rob Henderson, bestselling author of the book Troubled, a memoir on the foster care system in the social class. He's currently a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and contributing editor at the City Journal. Also, he recently wrote an article on his encounter with Charlie Kirk on Charlie Kirk's podcast and about people's amnesia about the pattern of political violence that plagues history, which he will discuss with me today. Okay, so thank you again for being here with me today, Rob. And my first question, jumping straight into it, is you were talking about how basically political violence in history is very common until we adopted like Enlightenment views in the West. So I guess I wanted you to just like tell me why you think it is that we're currently kind of the ideals of Enlightenment is currently diminishing, as well as just like why you think we're becoming a bit careless about it.
Well, yeah, thanks, Leah. It's a pleasure to be here. Observing like everyone else, the reaction to Charlie Kirk's death and this sense that political violence seems to be growing more acceptable. If you look at survey data, it seems like a growing number of people, especially young people under 30, believe that political violence is sometimes necessary to achieve your goals, or that it's permissible to celebrate political violence against your perceived opponents. And, those survey data in combination with the response to Charlie Kirk's murder, I read that article. I wanted to write about this topic because a lot of people forget how much struggle and how much bloodshed and debate and conflict took place historically before we arrived at this implicit agreement that we could settle our disputes about important issues with words rather than violence. Historically, it's been the norm that if powerful people hear things that you disagree with, that they will attempt to imprison you or murder you or take you out. There's no shortage of stories and information from historians who cover the religious conflicts of Europe up until the last couple of centuries. And I tell this story about René Descartes, the French philosopher, who himself was a devoted Christian, but he wrote a series of books in which he attempted to logically prove the existence of God. And in response, the Catholic Church banned his books, even though he came down on the, in air quotes, the correct side of the debate. He came to the conclusion that God does exist, but the church banned his books anyway because he treated the existence of God as something that was worthy of debate and scrutiny, and this was to the church considered a threat. And you can see parallels today that even if you come down on the correct side of an opinion, that people still don't want you to express your views or believe that your ideas shouldn't be platformed or countenanced because the very idea that you would debate something is offensive, challenging sacred norms, sacred ideas. And I think, Charlie Kirk did, regardless of whether you agree with his actual opinions, he did attempt to persuade his opinion or persuade his opponents with words, with debate, with communication. And, people were uncomfortable by that. I think there was this grim irony that he was killed on a college campus because college campuses are where this idea that words are violence was born. And so, Charlie comes onto these campuses and he's saying things that a lot of students agree with, many students disagree with, make people feel uncomfortable. And in response, eventually this gave rise to this fear, this anxiety, and then this desire to take him out. And it's a very dark path to go down, that if you think that words are the equivalent of violence, then you can use violence to silence people. But then if you inflict violence on someone, then you can also, by that same logic, inflict violence back. And this is a very dark path, a dark trajectory. If one side believes words are violence, the other, and then decides to use violence against those words, and then the other side says, well, you inflicted actual violence on me, so now I get to inflict it back. That is a recipe for catastrophe.
Yeah. I was also wanting to know more about the 2023 study that you also mentioned in the article about liberals and conservatives on the topic of like how they're perceived by one another versus like how they think they're perceived by one another. I think I said that right. Yeah. So go ahead.
Study where the idea of this 2023 study by a team of social psychologists, they basically wanted to know about what they called meta representations of people's political parties, political orientation. And so they basically wanted to know, do conservatives accurately understand how liberals view them? And then do liberals accurately perceive how conservatives view them? Can you sort of get into the mind of your political opponent and see how you look through their eyes? And one conclusion of that study was, yes, basically conservatives understand that liberals view them as, self-centered and unfeeling and, approve of social hierarchies and that kind of thing, with regard to, success and accomplishments. And then on the other hand, liberals accurately perceive that conservatives view them, meaning liberals, as a bit naive, a bit idealistic, disconnected from ground reality. So that was one interesting finding, is that we generally understand how the other side views us. The other interesting finding was the derogatory interpretation or perception of your own party. And what they basically found is that liberals tended to view conservatives as, the researchers used the phrase savage. So, conservatives, the most negative characteristics of conservatives are aggressive, hostile, confrontational. I mentioned unfeeling, callous. They have no empathy, that kind of thing. And then, on the other hand, conservatives tended to view liberals as immature, kind of undeveloped, a bit naive, idealistic, doesn't understand how the world really works, that kind of thing. And the other interesting finding is that conservatives overestimated how much liberals like them. If you ask a conservative, how much do you think liberals like you? They know that liberals don't have a high opinion of them, but they still tended to overestimate how much liberals like conservatives. So when you ask liberals directly, how much do you like conservatives? It was very low. If you ask conservatives, how much do you think liberals like you? It was actually higher than that. So they overestimated that perception. And then, so liberals had a much lower opinion of conservatives than conservatives believed liberals had of them. Whereas the opposite was true when you ask liberals, how much do you think conservatives like you? They actually underestimated how much conservatives like them. Conservatives actually have a generally fairly warm opinion of liberals. I mean, not as warm as they have of themselves. Conservatives like themselves the most, liberals like themselves the most, but conservatives had like a moderately warm opinion of liberals. Or they had, a moderately warm opinion of liberals, but then when you ask liberals, they actually underestimated that, and they thought that conservatives didn't like them very much. There's this interesting asymmetry where liberals really don't like conservatives, and conservatives don't understand this. And conservatives actually kind of like liberals, but liberals don't understand that either.
Okay. Also on that note, because I know, at least from what I've read, that conservatives tend to be more polite. So I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the fact that they tend to like liberals more than liberals think they do.
There's some interesting research on, these agreeableness, these big five personality traits. And one of the big five personality traits, if you take a personality test, you get a score on 5 different dimensions. One of those dimensions is agreeableness, and agreeableness can be broken down into compassion and politeness. conservatives are a little bit more polite than liberals. Liberals tend to be a bit more compassionate than conservatives on these measures. And so, yeah, maybe there's a bit of that going on there where conservatives, you know, I think counterintuitively to a lot of liberals, conservatives tend to give their political opponents more of the benefit of the doubt. That you'll often hear this in right-leaning circles that, yeah, liberals are a little unhinged or whatever, but I think their heart is in the right place. You're hearing that less now, especially after the death of Charlie Kirk. But that was a common thing you would hear in right-leaning circles was like, yeah, these liberals are a little, whatever, they're a little misguided. But, they're trying to do the right thing, but the way they're doing it is just completely ineffective and possibly destructive. Whereas you don't really hear that. If you hang out in left-leaning circles, you seldom hear like, oh, these conservatives, their hearts are in the right place, but they're going about it the wrong way. It's more so you're more likely to hear things like, these people really don't care about anyone else and we need to stop them.
That's also what you mentioned in your article. Like, so like what the sentiment, like what it motivates is like for liberals. I don't know exactly what you said because I can't quote you right now. But yeah, maybe explain more on like the gap between the two that you mentioned. Go ahead.
The gap in terms of what? Sorry.
The gap you mentioned between the liberal sentiments and conservative and like what that can lead to, basically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, if the conservatives tended to view the liberals as immature, undeveloped, a little naive, and that doesn't necessarily spark the desire for violence. Don't get me wrong, there is right-wing extremism and there is political violence carried out by people on the right, these extremists. But broadly speaking, you look at the general interpretation, the perceptions that the right has of the left, they're a little immature, but that doesn't spark this aggression and hostility. But the other direction, when liberals view conservatives as, what was the phrase the researchers used, as savage, as, aggressive and unfeeling, and they don't care about anyone, they're very selfish, that this can spark this desire for retribution, this desire for extinguishing that person because you view them as a threat. If you see someone as immature and idealistic, they're not necessarily a threat to you, or you don't perceive them as a threat. But if you view someone as selfish and unfeeling and aggressive, then that does activate this anxiety and this feeling like, oh, I need to stop them because they might hurt me.
Mm-hmm. Right. So also, I kind of wanted to, because I was thinking about like people were making like very political, and obviously you said there's obviously like political sentiments can motivate people. So I don't know, because like obviously a person who's not, well, I feel like mentally stable wouldn't, even if they're thinking these things, they're probably not going to act on it. But I guess since it's like, if, I don't know, maybe it's like once they get like more motivated, like group wise, say like, oh, we have to stop them and stuff. There's going to be maybe one unstable type of person, like who has like these tendencies that are going to act because they're taking it seriously, kind of.
Yes. Yeah. If the vast majority of people are, we're all exposed. We're all swimming in the same toxic slime of social media and political polarization and, all of the charges leveled back and forth of, which side is worse or whatever. And the majority of people who are in these, swimming in this slime, they're not going to carry out violence. But, if you take 1,000 people, and, people are not all interchangeable in terms of their attributes and levels of aggressiveness and hostility and willingness to carry out extreme acts. So you take 1,000 people and, some, handful of those people, when they're exposed to a lot of toxic stuff online and their hostility is praised and applauded. You see people posting horrible stuff online and they get a lot of likes and they get applause, and some people might see that and say, okay, well, if this person's getting applause for posting this aggressive content online, then how much applause might I get if I carry out an actual aggressive act in real life? So, yeah, I think it's good. Most political leaders have condemned the killing of Charlie Kirk. But, now we're in this increasingly fragmented media landscape, and the incentives are skewed where, I think in the past it was an agreed upon social norm that you shouldn't celebrate the death of your political adversaries, even if you disagree with them. It's still wrong to celebrate the death of an innocent person. But now with social media, it's a very alluring and enticing prospect to say something outrageous, get likes, and then other people see that, and potentially it might motivate them to act in the real world.
And like on that note as well, like you're saying, they might get applause and stuff. Do you think also a contributing factor could be like loneliness as well? Like, so they get their approval from online, obviously, then they don't have maybe as many support in like their actual social lives.
That's probably true. That some percentage of people, friendlessness is rising, rates of loneliness, sexlessness, relationship formation is declining. And a lot of young people, I think it's not a coincidence that the group that is the most supportive or the least apprehensive about political violence under 30, young people, that's also the group that reports the highest levels, at least in recent decades, the highest levels of loneliness and sexlessness, friendlessness, and all this stuff. They're spending a lot more time online. They're spending a lot more time on screens where, back in the day, if you had a group of real life friends, there's a restriction in terms of the range of how extreme that friend group might be. If you have 6 people, there's not a lot of range in terms of how extreme they are. But if you have, millions of people, and they're all online, and you're exposed to their content that tends to be a bit more exciting and dramatic and exhibitionistic, and those are the groups you're drawn to. People who you would never meet in real life, and who would probably not necessarily behave that way in real life either. But online, extremism can be rewarded. And yeah, I think, social media and the screens and all that stuff, it has supplanted a lot of real life interaction, and led to rising rates of loneliness.
Okay, so you said men ages 18 to 24 are most likely to commit murder, and then usually their victims are older men, 25 to 34. So I kind of wanted to know, like, why is that? And also, like, maybe a bit more about the research on that as well.
Yeah, this is a classic finding, going back to the 1980s. Margot Wilson and Martin Daly, these were psychologists. And they looked at the age crime curve, as they called it, the rates of violence and homicide across different demographics and age groups, and found that, young men, late teens, early 20s, that is the group that's most likely to commit violent crimes and homicides. And a 20-year-old man is 10 times more likely to commit a violent crime than a 60-year-old man. So it is that age group. And the victims are most likely to be, or disproportionately likely to be, men who are slightly older. So as you mentioned, 25 to 34. And so, that fact stood out to me, came to mind when I saw the video that everyone else saw of the shooting. And as the information was released about the assassin, the alleged assassin, who's 22 years old, and Charlie Kirk was 31 years old, and it matches that pattern of, you have a younger person, a younger male who's killing a slightly older male. And there could be different reasons for that. But one is, this feeling of envy or resentment. We tend to compare ourselves to those who are doing slightly better than ourselves. You see someone who's a little bit older, a bit more successful, and there are probably plenty of motives, and it's going to be impossible to disentangle all of them. But one reason why you see that pattern carried out, young men killing slightly older men who are also quite young, is that there's this envy directed at them, that they're older and doing slightly better, and they want to take them out.
Wow, that, like, to me also. Yeah, I didn't even think about, like, the fact that it could be envy. And also, maybe, do you think it's also because since it's envy, they're just seeing, like, what's directly in front of them. Like they haven't attained whatever it is that they're envious about in the older people. And so since maybe as well their brains aren't as developed, what I'm thinking, it could also be.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's the thing is though, there are millions of men in their 20s, teens and 20s, and not all of them are going to do something like this. So, their brains are all, too. But yes, of the men who do carry out these acts of violence, because even men who don't commit those acts, like recklessness and risky behavior, you just see it a lot more of it, even within a given individual's lifetime. If you take the same individual at age 20 versus age 60, you're going to see more recklessness and stupidity at age 20, and partially because, undeveloped frontal lobes and peer effects and, difficulties with impulse control and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, when you go into like the extremes and you see people who commit violence, it's there are age-related patterns. When I saw that, and I'm sure many of the listeners and the viewers saw this too, of the older gentleman who was arrested initially after the shooting, 71-year-old man. As soon as I saw that, immediately I thought, no way. Men that old do not commit political assassinations. I mean, obviously anything is possible, but I was immediately skeptical, and then it turned out that old man. This was reported recently in the New York Times that he was attempting to buy the assassin time by saying that he was the killer, so that the police would be distracted, so that the assassin would be allowed to flee the scene. And that's that matched the data much more than a 70-year-old man doing something like carrying out a political assassination.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Okay, also, I was wondering, maybe you could talk a little bit more about, like, what do you think there's any other, like, really good examples of, like, times in history when, like, or maybe even other recent examples in history of political violence and, like, I guess people taking it for granted, like ideals of free speech?
Interesting. My sense is that at least the educated elites of most, at least in recent history, they were aware of the dangers of violence. I guess what comes to mind is the wave of political violence in the U.S. in the 1960s and 1970s, where it did seem like there was this tension of, you have these ideals of dignity and equality and human worth and all this stuff, but there were factions, particularly on the extreme political left, who believe that we haven't achieved those things. The only way we can acquire dignity and equality and all of these social ideals is to carry out violence. But means tend to corrupt ends. If you have a noble goal in mind, but you do a bunch of sordid and repulsive acts to get there, then even if you do reach your goal, it will not be satisfying, and it will taint the whatever you've built if you had to use sordid means to get there. So anyway, I just think in this moment it seems like more people than ever have forgotten history. It's kind of not taught well in schools, and even educated people, political leaders, and so on. There's just this focus on what a friend of mine calls the never-ending now. That we're only focused on what happened within the last 10 minutes, and seldom go back and look at historical periods of instability and conflict and civil war, and what are the factors that led to those moments.
Yeah, I think that's kind of all the questions I had for you today. But I appreciate you coming on again. It was great having you and very interesting responses. So,
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.